All right, here's the review of all the graphs that you may have to know on the AP test, as well as on the final for me. Again, the final for me is all multiple choice, so you won't have to actually graph with labels, but here are all the graphs. The first one we talked about in this class was the production possibility curve. There's two kinds. There's increasing cost, which is bowed out, and there's constant opportunity cost, which is a straight line. More often than not, you'll be dealing with a whole economy, which will make you put capital goods on the vertical axis and consumer goods on the x-axis. The second graph we learned is the supply and demand curve for an individual product. Again, when you're dealing with an individual product, the vertical axis is the price of that good. Horizontal axis is the quantity of that good. Downward sloping demand, upward sloping supply. This is showing a decrease in demand. Down here is showing a decrease in supply. When you draw these, make sure you draw as many arrows as possible and label the changes. So here, the demand shifted from here, so they have D and D2. You could label it D and D prime, D1, D2. Just make sure you're clear. Another one we learned was the business cycle. Business cycle, this should be more slanted, but E is an expansionary time. P is what we call the peak. When it comes down, we call it contractionary, and there's the trough, right? Don't worry about this investment demand curve. This curve, the AS, should be short-run aggregate supply, aggregate demand, and long-run aggregate supply. Remember, the horizontal axis is real GDP. Vertical axis is price level. As always, aggregate demand is downward sloping. Short-run aggregate supply is upward sloping. And long-run aggregate supply is vertical. They label it here as YP. Sometimes the problem will have you label it YF. That will depend on the specific problem. This economy is currently in a recession. Price levels labeled PL1, real GDP1. You can just abbreviate that as Y, up to you. In the money market, this is labeled incorrectly. This should be an R, a lowercase r. In the money market, the Fed controls the money supply, which is vertical. At any one point in time, the money supply is constant. Downward sloping money demand. Horizontal axis is the quantity of money. Vertical axis is the nominal interest rate. Moving on, the loanable funds market. In the loanable funds market, we have a downward sloping demand for loanable funds. As the interest rate goes down, people demand more loans. As the interest rate goes up, people save more, which supplies loanable funds. So the vertical axis is the real interest rate. Horizontal axis is the quantity of loanable funds. Again, show shifts, label everything. Phillips curve, this is the one we've most recently learned. More often than not, this long-run Phillips curve will intersect this short-run Phillips curve at 5%, 2%, right? Our target inflation rate is 2%. Our long-run Phillips curve, our natural rate of unemployment is 5%. If they tell you to graph it and they say unemployment's higher, then that means you must be down here somewhere, which probably means you have lower inflation. But remember, the Phillips curve has unemployment on the x-axis, inflation on the y-axis. If inflation is above 2%, you're up here. If inflation is below 2%, you're down here. Accordingly, if unemployment is above 5%, you're further on this x-axis. If unemployment's below 5%, you're up here. Remember the Snoop dot method. If aggregate demand shifts, you move from one dot. Demand shifts, you move from one dot to another dot. If supply shifts, you snoop the whole graph. So if supply shifts, you actually change the whole short-run Phillips curve. And then there's two ways to show economic growth, and you're familiar with both of these. The easiest way is when long-run aggregate supply shifts to the right. That represents long-run economic growth. The other one is with the PPC. If the PPC shifts outward, that means you can produce more. Unfortunately, we didn't have to learn exchange rates this year, but exchange rates are similar as well to all the other ones. Downward sloping demand, upward sloping supply. The price is the conversion rate. Again, you don't need to know this for the test, but that's how you would do it.